right. Hi, everybody. My name is Heather Ryder. I'm actually with Colorado State University. My work office is actually in the CSU Diagnostic Lab. So that's the veterinary diagnostic lab. We're up here in Fort Collins at the university campus. I am the avian health program coordinator. And we're actually a very unique program in Colorado, the role that we serve. We have an acronym, like many people, we're the CAHP, so Colorado Avian Health Program. And that umbrella encompasses the NPIP program, so the National Poultry Improvement Plan for Colorado. So for flocks that are out there that are interested in becoming an NPIP participant, so flocks that are trying to sell birds over state lines or trying to do exhibitions that may be out of state, they need to meet federal import-export requirements, they would want to join the NPIP program to kind of meet that testing requirement. So that they would be talking to us, my program, and we would be helping kind of navigate the National Poultry Improvement Plan for them. We're also the diagnostic lab. So whenever we have sick birds or anything like that, that actually comes in right into my lab, and sometimes I'm actually the one studying those tests. So especially right now with high-path avian influenza out there, that would be something that if you're submitting testing, that would come to us at Colorado State University, the diagnostic lab. But we also do all sorts of other avian diseases, Microplasmas, ILT, IBV, kind of any of the common things, necropsies. So necropsy is one of the best diagnostic tools we have for poultry. So that is a service we provide out of the diagnostic lab here at CSU. And then the other piece that we do is just kind of general health and outreach, or general outreach with poultry. We're just kind of out there in the community where, we're talking to 4-H groups. We're out there at fairs, shows, swaps. So if you guys have ever been to more of the Front Range here just because of distance, but if you kind of attend a county fair or one of like the Colorado Poultry Association shows or the feather fancier shows, when you check in at those fairs and shows, you're going through, you're talking to us, and we're doing the health checks at those shows and kind of doing the diagnostic testing for avian influenza at those. We also go to events, other poultry events. So that's a little bit about me and what I do. And so today I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit brief. I think I've got a few minutes just to talk to you guys about biosecurity before I hand you back over to all these other wonderful poultry experts. And let's see, we'll go to the next slide, I think, here. So yeah, right now, I don't know how many, I was kind of trying to look at that poll. It sounds like there's a few of you out there that are probably pretty familiar with the kind of avian influenza situation in the United States, especially that it's high-path avian influenza. So high-path avian influenza means there's usually a high mortality associated with it, and it's very contagious, and it's considered a regulatory disease and very much a disease of concern. It is so much of a disease of concern that it has the potential to impact both trade with other states and then international trade, right? So it's been kind of popping its head up in Europe over the last 2 years. We kind of were worried about the spring migration last year, but it really didn't show up much here in the United States. But then with this migration, it's been showing up all over the United States. Now, I don't have the latest statistics in my, there probably are people on here that know them better than me, but I believe it's 17 or 18 states that have had high path. And I think it's somewhere upwards of 7 to 8 million birds that have had to be euthanized because of high path avian influenza. So it's definitely in the kind of the Atlantic and the Central Flyway. This one is coming over on migratory birds, and we're seeing source introductions from those migratory birds. And I don't know if you guys aren't in tune with Colorado news. We just had a wild bird detection. Actually, I think it was 6 confirmed wild bird snow geese and Ross geese, which is just a morpha or a type of snow geese up there in the, am I going to say it right, Sedgwick County? Hopefully, if I butchered that, someone can correct me. And so, yeah, so we've had now wild bird here in Colorado, which depending on the state, it starts to kind of, like Texas already just kind of has a general line. Any state that had a high path, they kind of put a whole lot of restrictions on you trying to import birds into Texas. And so now they have a 72-hour testing. That's how it kind of affects local trade. Other states, it's just on a state-by-state basis. So that's the thing. So it's here in Colorado. It's definitely got everyone really nervous. It's the first time it's been detected here in Colorado. It's not in poultry, it's not in backyard flocks, it is in wild birds, and I just kind of want to make sure that that's clear, that it hasn't gotten into our flocks. But really what I'm going to talk about is just kind of some general biosecurity, but then there's also just some considerations right now because there is high path. So in the poultry world, there's kind of like when everything's going really good and we're all just kind of cruising along as normal, we kind of hopefully you're doing base biosecurity. And we're going to talk about what that is. But then usually you want to have a plan in place so when things are not so great, which is right now, when we've kind of got these really kind of big diseases in the state, you're able to kind of ramp up your biosecurity and really protect yourself because getting this disease is pretty bad. And the other thing is we just don't want to spread it. So this first website here that we have, and this is an amazing source. I think that we are sharing the links in the chat box. So please, write those down. Defend the Flock is a great resource that APHIS puts out there. They have videos, they have handouts, they have all sorts of stuff on biosecurity, like Biosecurity 101, some great stuff to watch with your kids. Even if you're just, just trying to figure out hey, what's the base minimum thing I can do to protect my flock? I've never even heard this word or really thought about it with poultry. It's going to give you a lot of great ideas on how to implement it in a backyard flock. So they're taking large scale production level biosecurity and they're breaking it down and saying, hey, what can you do in your backyard flock? Kind of trying to follow what they do at the big commercial entities. So yes, please visit the APHIS Defend the Flock website, the link. It's really good, lots of great resources. And then too, share it with your communities. The best way that we can kind of spread this information is for us to share it. So keep, you guys are going to learn some stuff after today, and then take that information and then keep passing it along, right? Keep sharing it with other poultry owners, because maybe it's just a matter of never heard about it, never thought about it, don't really know about it. And it's oh, well, that's interesting. So please take a look at that website. Okay, next page. So these really are kind of just really four kind of basic kind of tenets of biosecurity. And in backyard flocks, the all-in, all-out management can be really tough because a lot of times we're sourcing and buying birds at different times because maybe we're we're trying to do some genetic breeding and we're trying to get certain varieties. And so maybe you're trying to buy a bird from here and a bird from there, and you're bringing them together and hoping to breed them. The challenge with that sometimes is that that's an easy way to bring in disease into your flock because you're sourcing your birds from different sources. So what I say, it's not that you can't do that, but just when you're kind of doing that kind of work and you're thinking about that, really it's kind of buyer beware. Do your homework. Who is the flock you're getting this from? Is this just some random thing you saw on Craigslist and that bird looks really cute? Or is this a established flock that has good biosecurity? Maybe they've got some disease programs in place, like their NPIP, they have Microplasma free programs. Those tend to be larger hatcheries that have that status. And then ask them about their biosecurity. If they can't really talk about it a lot, or it's just kind of really general or vague, that should cause just in your head, you should be thinking, maybe this isn't such a good place to source this bird. Anytime too, if you are bringing a new bird, say you're at a show and you see this really cute bird and you just gotta have it. Well, that's okay, but bring it home and make sure you can quarantine it. So make sure you have a spot that's somewhere else on your premise that bird can kind of be, where it's not with your other birds. So if it does have a disease or it is sick, it allows you some time to kind of try to see if something kind of comes up. Now, there's no magic. There is definitely no magic number on that. Is 2 weeks enough? Is 4 weeks enough? The longer, the better. 3 to 4 weeks is kind of what we say is kind of base minimum. And then anything that you can do beyond that is great because diseases don't always show up right away, just like how we kind of carry some things within us. There's poultry diseases like that don't necessarily show up right away. So if you're thinking about all in, all out, try to think about all those other steps that you can do. But otherwise, if you are kind of brand new to poultry, you don't even have a bird on your premise, when you're going to buy a batch of birds, try to think about getting them from one source and make sure it's a reputable hatchery that has good diagnostic or good disease programs, good biosecurity. So really do your homework, do a lot of asking questions. Don't get too googly-eyed over the cute little chick, right? Because even that cute little chick can carry diseases that, and then you can bring home to your other birds, like mycoplasmas and stuff like that. We don't like to mix in our world where I kind of sit. Mixing waterfowl and turkeys and chickens is a bad idea. There's actually diseases that they can give each other. High path or even influenza in general, it doesn't have to be high path. There's no pathogenic with high path. Basically, bird flu, high path flu. It is, waterfowl can live with it pretty well. Most occasionally it does cause some issues, but a lot of times it doesn't. They don't get sick, so they kind of, and they're really good once they get it. It's spread through their fecal. It can be spread through the feces, and also it can be airborne. One of the statistics I heard, which to me was fairly impressive, that if you take a time-size piece of poop from an infected high-path bird, that it's enough to affect 1 million birds, right? So that's a lot of viral load in just this a little bit of feces, right? So, that's where you start to think about with high-path being out there. Think about waterfowl, they're everywhere right now. I mean, I just took a walk with my dogs last weekend. I just come up to work and I've got like 26 Canada geese greeting me on my way to work. And when I'm out there in the parks, they're everywhere right now. So now I just think, oh my God, but I don't have poultry, but I work with poultry. But I just think, hey, what could I be doing right now when I go home? Changing my shoes, maybe the shoes that I'm wearing to the park, maybe taking a shower if I was actually, and think about your pets. Your pets are running around in that. How easy are they to clean, I mean, we all love to wash our dogs, right? I mean, we love to do that daily, if not hourly, but that doesn't really happen. So just think about if they can bring that disease into your flock too. So maybe this time of year, you really go to places where waterfowl are not. Don't be trouncing around the parks right now. I know that's really hard as spring is kind of upon us, and well, maybe other than today here in Fort Collins, but the weather's nice and we really want to be outside. But just be thinking about that if you have poultry and having good biosecurity around your poultry. Keep everything clean. I can't emphasize cleanliness enough. Clean boots, clean gear, clean hands, and to keep your coops clean, right? Because having dirty, wet, moist coops full of fecal material is also another way to spread other diseases like E. coli, campylobacteria, salmonella, things that can impact us. I think I talked about purchasing birds from reputable sources. So I think we can go to the next slide here. Let's see, I probably got to watch my time here. I think we talked about isolating birds. So again, if you're going to fair, anytime you're bringing new birds in, just be able to isolate them, And then too, if you're when you're doing your chores, when you're choring, make sure you're doing your healthy birds first and what I would call sick or quarantine birds second, right? So think about, don't want to take disease from your quarantined or sick flock and bring it to your healthy flock. So when you're choring, go out there, but then don't share the equipment between the two coops. So have everything separate or be able to disinfect it. And yeah, next one. I think we talked about this, but again, the one thing I think too, it's easy we're getting into fair season, especially if you have 4-H kids. We all want to go see each other's poultry. Probably not the time of year to be doing that, especially with high path around. I know that's really hard. If it is a situation where you're out there at somebody else's flock and you've got birds, make sure you shower when you get home, change those clothes completely, make sure you change your shoes and all that. Try not to invite disease into your flock. Okay, next one. And I talked about this. So again, we don't like to have mixed species just because waterfowl can give avian influenza to chickens, turkeys. There's a mycoplasma that turkeys can have, but it's worse on turkeys. Mycoplasma can actually cause mortality in turkeys, or in chickens, sometimes we'll just make them like a chronic cold. Well, in turkeys, it can actually really cause some mortality within turkeys. And then there's things like blackhead and other things that can just be shared back and forth. So this is why, even though I know it looks great out on your farm to have everybody running around and happy all together, it's still not ideal just because these guys share diseases that they can pass back and forth to each other. Okay, I think next one. Yeah, and that's the other thing too. We work swaps, and I just have a story because I think sometimes stories are great. This gentleman was out there at the swap. He bought some birds, and then he's after he did that, he had and he started looking at the birds wait. So he called us over there and he's like, hey, I'm not so sure about these birds, but now that I look at them, I don't think they're looking so great. So we grabbed some swabs for him. He was able to keep him quarantined in the meantime. So we ran him back to the lab and we ran the test, and sure enough, they were positive for mycoplasma. And he had to make that decision what he did with them. But again, he could have brought that disease really easily into his flock because he wanted to buy these kind of chickens. And you can't. Luckily we kind of saw that they didn't look great, but they don't always show signs of that. So some of these diseases aren't just visible. So sometimes if you are going to bring new birds in, the other thing is you could submit some samples for testing at the diagnostic lab. So if you're worried about mycoplasma or something else, you could quarantine those birds and submit some samples for testing. Let's see, what's next? Anything? This was just a picture graph that we put together because a lot of times I've heard me mention shoes a bunch of times. So we want to get that kind of that thought in your head. We put these little yellow boots on there because, I talked about going to the park, going to another farm, maybe you went to the feed store and you stopped by and you saw all those cute little chickens, those little chicks right now, they're in the feed stores because they're so cute and we just cannot walk by them without looking at them. But think about all the other 100 people that day that walked by them because they're so cute and you walked in their footsteps and now you guys shared all that, and even those little baby chicks, right? So some feed stores are better than others on their biosecurity. Some of them you can walk right up to, and others are nice and they have some distance built between the public. Again, just kind of keep that in mind. That's why you want to have some dedicated. That's why shoes especially are important to have dedicated on your flock.
My name is Juliana Brockelman, and I am the Poultry Superintendent for Arapahoe County. I've been the superintendent for 3 years now, and I was in the poultry project as a 4-H member for 8 years. So I know my way a little bit around 4-H poultry, and today I'm gonna hopefully be able to share this PowerPoint with you guys that I made. Give me 1 second. All right. Can you all see that?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so this is geared primarily at the 4-H member in mind, which if you're not 4-H, it's still good information. I think it's valuable to share this no matter what, but just know some of it may be tuned a little bit more towards those kiddos. So what to consider before buying our birds? There's lots to consider. You really shouldn't ever go into a feed store and be like, oh, Heather talked a lot about the cute, cuddly little chicks. You should try and avoid them before you have considered all of these things. So the first thing to consider is size. And size is huge when it comes to poultry because there's the size of the 4-H'er and then the size of the bird. So 4-H members' hand size is a big deal. My hand size is pretty small. So I tend to stick with smaller birds. But larger 4-H members, especially males, tend to have bigger hands, so they're able to hold larger birds. Not only do you want to be able to hold the bird so you can control it, but you want the bird to be comfortable in your hand. If you're holding this huge Jersey giant and instead of your hand being comfortable and flat, if instead it's drooping and the bird's about to slip off and your wrist feels like it's gonna break, it's not a good situation for you or the bird. So just keep that in mind. The other thing is your arm strength. Birds, especially when you're waiting in line for showmanship, tend to get very, very heavy. So it's important to know that you can carry that bird around, whether that's just prepping it, whether that's getting it tamed down for showmanship, or whether that's standing there in line waiting for your turn for showmanship. So the three main sizes of birds are bantams, which are the most common among 4-H members. They are the smallest. They come in so many varieties. Often there's not a lot of breeds that don't come in bantams. They're easiest for showmanship and prepping the birds. That's why 4-H members tend to use them. I know in Arapahoe County, showmanship is a requirement to complete the project, so maybe keep that in mind. There are also standard, which are known kind of as the normal sized chickens. These are easiest to keep as backyard flocks. They are hardy, they are built for egg production, they're built to be healthy and just be happy little chickens. They don't require a lot of extra care, but they do tend to weigh on average about triple to quadruple the amount of a bantam. So if you're a smaller or a younger 4-H member, I would highly suggest staying away from these birds. As you can tell, the bird on the right, the buff Orpington in the middle, she is a very big girl. And if you're standing there holding her for 10 minutes of showmanship, you are uncomfortable, that bird is uncomfortable, and she will be flapping trying to get away from you. So, and then I just kind of grouped all of these together, large fowl. And what I mean by large fowl is turkeys, geese, and large ducks. Some other counties may have like, you can show your market chickens and stuff kind of grouped into that category, but for Arapahoe County, we consider it turkeys, geese, and large ducks. And these are multi-purpose. You may use them for meat, for eggs, as defenders of your flock. So they kind of have a little bit more range as to what they can reach for, not just show or 4-H. But keep in mind, these are not as common. So if you're attending poultry workshops, you may have way more questions because they're working with a bantam chicken, showing you all the parts and how to display the bird correctly. And you're like, well, what about my turkey? Very different process. But this can also be a great benefit because the judge is so used to seeing all these bantam chickens. If you stroll up to the judging table with a turkey and you're ready to do showmanship, their ears perk up, they start to pay a little bit more attention to you just because you're stepping outside of that box. So we're going to move on to the next thing, which is, of course, cleanliness. And as Heather mentioned multiple times, this is so important right now, especially. There are low maintenance birds and high maintenance birds. And I hope you guys can tell the difference just by looking at them, because even from baby chicks, you can tell which ones are going to take a lot of work. So the low maintenance birds are the larger breeds that carry their weight well. And what I mean by that is I live in Colorado. I think a lot of you do. We have some Idaho folks on here as well, and Wyoming. Those places tend to get cold. So you definitely want birds that can survive the winter, can stay warm, aren't getting frostbite, but you also don't want the birds like meat birds that grow so fast and grow so heavy that eventually their legs give out. So just keep that in mind. You also want birds that are highly feathered. Again, this is for warmth, for cleanliness, and just for overall appearance. Nobody really likes looking at a bird that's missing all of its feathers. Not a great look. If you like those birds, there are naked necks for that. So go out and check those out. Clean-legged birds are huge. When birds have feathers on their feet, like two of the birds on the side of the screen, they collect fecal matter. They carry around dust. Mites and lice tend to hang out in those feathers, and they're extremely hard to clean. So if your birds have clean legs, like the Wyandotte, the black and white chicken on the roost, it's way easier to keep clean. You can clearly tell when the legs are getting really dirty and you need to give them a good scrub with a soft brush. Highly recommend choosing a bird with clean legs. Combs are also another key factor, especially in cold climates. Combs that are close to the head, again, talking about the Wyandotte on the perch, as you can tell, you can barely see her comb. It is so close to her head. This is very beneficial because in cold climates, combs tend to get frostbitten. And if you're raising them as a flock, they also tend to get pecked out by other birds. So if they're closer to their head, they're less likely to get frostbite and they're less likely to have them picked at and then eventually, hopefully, not fall off. The last two kind of go hand in hand. You want wings that don't drag and short tails. Again, if they have these two features, they're dragging them through all the fecal matter, through all the dust. It's just not a good situation. And especially today in Colorado, we got a lot of rain, and a few of my birds have these wings that drag on the ground, and they are muddy messes. So then we get to sit there and clean them off and pick the mud balls. Not fun. Then the higher maintenance birds are going to be almost the exact opposite. These are smaller breeds that are skinny. Game bantams are really fun to show, but they are very hard to keep just because they don't carry their weight enough. So they need to stay extra warm, which can mean more heat lamps, which in turn causes a whole other set of problems. So just please keep an eye on your climate and what birds you know you can handle. If you're raising them in a very warm and enclosed environment, you can branch out a little bit more. Again, lightly feathered or missing feathers, these birds are challenging. They won't stay as warm. They'll be more exposed to the elements, which of course are snow to make them cold, but also sun. Chickens will sunburn and it is not pleasant. And trust me, none of you want to be out there putting sunblock on your chickens to keep them from burning. So just make sure that you pick birds that are well feathered. Naked necks, as I mentioned before, are missing feathers on their entire neck. These tend to really need a lot of work to keep them safe and protected. Feather-legged birds are great and cute and fluffy, but they're incredibly dirty. Comes with points. Again, they'll be attractors for other birds to peck at, and then they bleed, and then you have sores, and it's a lot of work. So if they're closer to the head, you're in better shape. Wings that drag on the ground, again, with the fecal matter, the mud, all of it, just stay away from it. Long tails, phoenixes, pheasants, and all of these wonderful breeds that have the beautiful long tails, they're amazing. We love them. But these are huge, not only for dragging through dust and mud, but if you happen to live out in the country, or it happens in the city too, you can get a mice problem, and they sit there and they chew on the bottoms of the tails. And then you're dealing with these nasty broken feathers, and your birds are now exposed to rodents. So I just highly suggest staying away from these birds. This is the last one is a special feature of a few of these breeds. If they have muffs or beards, which is like this fluffy part, both birds on the screen on the right-hand side for me, I hope it's the right for you, have these muffs, and it's just extra feathers, or crested birds, which is like extra fluff here and extra fluff here. This is just an extra place for bugs to sit and for you to clean. So it's just not worth it. The next thing you want to consider is whether you're going to choose males or females. And the poultry term for males are cockerels and cocks. And the female term for poultry are pullets and hens. So for cocks and cockerels, I'm going to talk a little bit more on the showing portion of this. The pros are that they're flashier. They tend to show better. These birds like to strut their stuff in their cage. They're not afraid of being proud, and they know they're pretty. So they're really good, especially if you have a lot of exhibition shows. Great to show cocks. They have longer tails and more distinctive wings. As you can tell, both of these birds, those beautiful long feathers that arch over, are called sickle feathers. And these are distinctive of cocks. And it's so eye-catching. And when they're in pristine condition, like both of these birds, they look gorgeous. Cocks also tend to stay cleaner because they do not sit in nest boxes, and they tend to get out of the coop more. So they take care of themselves more. They tend to have more color, and they hold their color better. As hens age and the more eggs they produce, their color kind of drains, and they'll kind of look like they've been sitting out in the sun too long. So cocks will have more specialized patterns, and they're just fancier birds overall. Their feathers stay intact better because when cocks are surrounded by hens, the cocks tend to breed the hens, and then their feathers break off. So if you have a cock by himself, he has nothing to break his feathers on except his pen and his coop. So they tend to be in better condition. And cocks are more readily available. It's harder to have them in the city because they crow, and breeders are always trying to get rid of the unnecessary male birds. So they're easier and usually cheaper to get. The cons, they can be temperamental, of course, like all chickens. These guys tend to have a little bit more of an attitude, so they kind of take a little bit more to calm them down. They also have spurs, that have to be maintained. You do not want to be clipped with a spur. You do not want spurs to get caught in coops and pens. So you just have to be very cautious and very aware of those spur conditions. These birds also, if you take them to large shows, they may try to fight the other cocks in the pens. So sometimes you have to put dividers up. Of course, they will try to breed all the females they come in contact with, and they will try to pick on all the other males around them. So just keep that in mind. And of course, crowing. We all love to hear it until it becomes annoying. So just make sure you're complying with where your house sits and you're not getting yourself, your family, or your neighbors in trouble. Hens and pullets, crows, they're friendlier, they're calmer, and of course, they lay eggs. So if you're looking for something that's not just a pretty pet, get a hen. They get along with other chickens better, including cocks. If you tend to have a whole group of hens and one cock, the cock feels like he doesn't really have to try that hard for the lady's attention, so he tends to interact better too. They rest better in your hand because they're wider, because they have their egg cavity. So they'll sit down in your hand flatter, which can be nice, but it also can make them a little heavier. They don't crow, and they have no spurs, and they tend to be smaller and weigh less than any other cock of any other breed. The cons is that they're harder to buy and may cost more just because people do want them to either breed with, to have eggs. So you just gotta be prepared for that going into them. If they are in the mood to brood, which is where they sit on their eggs and they're trying to nest and trying to hatch out chicks, they get really cranky. If you can keep your hens off of these nests and keep them interacting and not really give them a choice to go, as we call broody, then they tend not to get as cranky. But again, the feathers are dull and likely to be broken. We talked about that already. They're more common looking, just like the hens on your screen right now. Those are kind of just everyday chickens that we see, and they can be dirtier. Of course, these hens sit in nest boxes when they're laying eggs, but also if you have them around cocks, then the cocks are jumping on them to breed them, which then in turn takes everything from the ground and puts them all over their bodies. So they can get a little messy. All right, so you've made all these things, these choices up in your mind. You know what you're after. Now it's time to buy. But when, where, and how should you do this all? So when? As a poultry superintendent, I cannot stress this enough. You should always check your fair book to make sure you are meeting hatch dates and ownership dates. Every fair counts backwards from when their fair date is, so it tends to change every year. If not, you're super lucky, because I have to count out days every single year for my 4-H kiddos. So just make sure you're complying with those, and you should be good to go. Also, buying in the late winter or early spring is usually your best bet. These birds have a better chance of survival because the weather is warming up, but also so you don't have to feed them throughout the winter. Birds eat way more during the winter to stay warm, and also they're not pecking the ground as much because there's not many nutritious things for them to eat. When you're choosing where to buy your birds, I'm going to kind of jump around on this column. Large poultry shows and contacting breeders directly are your best bet for getting show quality, purebred, amazing birds. I would always start here. This is my go-to place. Even as a superintendent, this is where I buy my birds. You can also buy them online and from feed stores. Of course, the cute little chicks in all the little tubs right now are adorable, but they tend not to know exactly what they are, whether they're females or males. So you're kind of just shooting in the dark and hoping you get something that works. I cannot emphasize this enough. Please stay away from social media and Craigslist when you buy your birds. If you find one, that's a great deal. There are some Facebook pages I know of that are directly for poultry members. Instead of commenting on that post, reach out to that person directly. This allows you to have a conversation with them about their flock, their health habits, just like Heather mentioned, And also make sure that you're not getting scammed in the process. So just buyer beware. The how is find out when your breeders will be hatching or selling and get on a wait list. If they know you're interested, likely they'll pull some special birds aside for you, especially if you're a 4-H kiddo, and make sure that you get quality stock. They want their birds to continue to thrive, and the best way to do that is to put them in the hands of our youth. Check online hatch dates to ensure that your chicks are not shipping during the winter. When they are shipping and it's freezing outside, because a lot of these places ship internationally, it may be sunny in Tennessee, but it is a blizzard in Colorado. So make sure you're watching the weather and picking a good time for those birds to come in the mail if that's how you choose for them to arrive. And then, of course, find out when chick days are at all your feed stores. And if you need to, place a specialty order so your birds come in exactly when you want them to. This is just a quick overview, strictly my opinion, on the best breeds for 4-H. Of course, every breed can be an acceptable breed and everybody has their favorites. These just tend to be readily available, calm, clean, and overall great 4-H birds. So for bantams, I'll rattle off a few of my favorite, the Americanas, the Modern Games, the Japanese, and the Seabrights, and of course, Wyandottes. All great birds. If you're looking at the standard sizes, again, Americanas do come in larger breeds, and we also have New Hampshires, Orpingtons, Plymouth Rocks, and Wyandottes again. These you can readily get almost anywhere. For large fowl, again, this is turkeys, geese, and large ducks, all lightweight breeds for ducks. If you get into the medium weights, I guarantee you, you will not be able to hold these throughout showmanship, so please stay away from them. Geese, again, way too heavy to be picking up during showmanship. They have to be carried, and they're just kind of messy overall and get a little cranky when they're put on the floor and not on something fluffy and soft with shavings. So I would stay away from geese. And turkeys, all breeds are acceptable because they stay on the ground for showmanship. So you're free to choose whichever one is your favorite. And again, I'll do questions in the comments or in the chat. So I hope you guys found that helpful, and please let me know if you had any questions. Thank you.
I appreciate you having me on tonight. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, my name is Heidi Waymont. I have a master's degree in nutrition. I work for Intermountain Farmers Association in Utah. Our company services Utah, Idaho, Colorado, Nevada, Wyoming. We're a co-op, so we have 23 retail stores, and then we have multiple wholesale dealers that we work with. So I have been with IFA for 17 years. I have formulated feeds, nutrition for pretty much everything but dogs and cats. So I've learned a lot, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to be on here with you tonight. So when Andrea called me, I just kind of asked her what some questions were, just kind of an outline of what she wanted me to talk about. So she gave me kind of some common questions that she gets. So I'm just going to kind of go through some of those and answer some common nutrition, give some common nutrition information. And then if there's questions or anything, we can go that way. So we're just going to start off. She said one of the main concerns or questions is, when do you switch from a starter to a grower to a layer? So you want to keep those chicks on a starter up to 8 weeks. And then at 8 weeks, you're going to switch them over to a broiler or a pullet developer, and you're going to feed that until 16 weeks. And then after that, anywhere from 16 to 19 weeks, they will start to lay. So then you want to switch over to that layer feed. I get a lot of questions, common questions about what level of protein do I want to have them on for a layer feed. And there's really no right answer for that. And I'm going to give you a little bit of information, and then you can see why. Birds, poultry specifically, are the only animals, species that eat to their nutrient requirement. I wish I could eat to my nutrient requirement and then stop, but they are the only animals that do that. And so when we're formulating diets for these birds, we have to keep that in mind, and we have to make sure that those ratios are correct. So they're going to eat until their energy requirement has been met, and then they're going to stop. So within that, we have to make sure that the protein is high enough, the energy is high enough, the vitamin mineral package is balanced appropriately. Because if you think about it, birds are going to eat anywhere from 80 to 120 grams, which calculates to 0.17 pounds up to 0.26 pounds. So that's a very small amount. And actually, poultry do not have a protein requirement. They have a requirement for amino acids. And if any of you know what amino acids are, they're the building blocks of protein. So poultry chickens are able to produce most of the amino acids, but the two limiting amino acids are lysine and methionine. And so the protein level is listed on those feeds. Either usually you're feeding a 16%, an 18%, or a 20% layer feed. So those feeds are formulated to that level, but actually what we're providing with that is the amino acid profile for those feeds, which is going to build muscle in those birds. So because of that, if you think about it this way, let's say you're looking at feeding a 20% feed versus a 16% feed. And if you keep that in mind, that the bird is going to eat to their energy requirement, they're going to eat more of that 16% feed than they are of the 20% feed. They're going to get the same nutrition, the same value in there, but they're going to eat less of that 16% feed. So then it comes down to economics, right? Do you want to be feeding that lower feed and feeding more of it, or do you want to be feeding that higher protein feed and feeding less? So then you're going to have to figure out the cost of that feed, how well the birds are digesting that feed. All of that is going to go into that then at that point to determine if you're going to keep feeding that 16 or the 20% feed. Along with that, as you know, birds do go through a molt. During that time, it is helpful to have them on a higher protein level. A gentleman that I work with, he raises chickens and he keeps his birds on that 20% feed year round. Even winter, summer, whatever. So it helps during the molt. It gives them that extra protein boost during the molt. But then he's maintaining that consistency throughout the year. So they're going to eat less feed in the summer, right? Because it's going to be warmer. In the winter, they're going to eat a little bit more of that to maintain that body heat. But also something to think about as well. In the summer, they're trying to cool themselves, so that's going to take also some energy to do that as well. So each season requires a different level of nutrition for that bird. So if you keep them on that 20%, it's pretty easy, you know, for them to adjust to that, what they need. Let's see, another thing we kind of talked about was conditioning on these birds. And this one is kind of interesting. I work with a lot of cattle and sheep and goats, so larger animals. And when we talk about conditioning them, right, we're going out and we're exercising them, we're walking them, we're doing these bigger things for bigger animals. So how do you condition your chickens? And so one good way to do that is we feed scratch, right? We feed the chicken scratch mostly as a treat. If you will actually bury that scratch, bury it in the ground instead of just sprinkling it out on the ground, them having to paw and dig for that scratch is going to condition them. So that's a good way to condition the birds. And that because during the show season, you know, that to maintain the energy that they need for show season, and then that's going to carry over into the laying and the breeding season. So that's just a good, easy way to condition the birds. But I also want to mention with that to remember that treats like your scratch or scraps, whatever you're using for treats, should not be fed at more than 10% of the diet. They are not complete feeds, they are a treat. So make sure that you're feeding that at 10% or less, and that will maintain the nutrient profile that you're getting from that complete poultry feed. Let's see what else. In our feeds, so we manufacture 3 feeds, a 16 and 18 and a 20% protein. Another thing to remember, to make sure that you are getting a good quality complete feed. Poultry are small, right? So the rate at which the feed goes through the digestive system is going to be very quickly. Because of that, we want to make sure that they're getting everything that they can to digest that and maintain growth and production through that small cycle that the feed is passing through the digestive system. So when I formulated our feeds, keeping that in mind, we use a very dense mineral vitamin package. We're using yeast products, probiotics, prebiotics that are going to help that digestive tract so that it can absorb more readily. We use products, especially in our chick starter, that also maintains that gut health. That's very important in the chicks, to make sure that you're providing that good environment in the digestive system, because that will carry on later in life and affect how they grow and how they develop and how well they are going to digest feed and absorb that feed. Make sure we talked about, I can't remember her name, sorry, but the lady that first talked about health and biosecurity, and that's very important also in the feed section, to make sure that we're putting those ingredients in the feed that are going to provide the digestive health, and that's going to affect the immunity of the birds. So that's also something to make sure when you're choosing a feed that it has that package in there for that digestive health. Make sure that your calcium and phosphorus ratios are important. Calcium is very important, especially in our laying hens. Calcium is what makes that hard shell in the egg. So make sure you're providing that. Grit is also very important for the gizzard. That's what breaks down the feed as it first enters the bird. So again, thinking about that short amount of time that the feed is in the digestive system, the gizzard is very important. It's critical. And then the way that the feed is formulated is also critical to make sure that it's available to be absorbed by the bird.